Welcome to AETCM, the Emergency Medicine channel. Today we'll be discussing a case of upper GI bleed. Can we start, sir? A 48-year-old male presented to our ER with history of 3 to 4 episodes of hematemesis and 2 to 3 episodes of melena since about a day. So our initial 10-second assessment, airway appeared patent, breathing was spontaneous with a normal appearance in circulation-wise. Patient was alert. Now, primary survey, when it comes to airway, patient was able to talk in one full sentence. There was no gurgling sounds, no stridor, hoarseness of voice, or pooling of secretions noted. Breathing wise, patient had a respiratory rate of 18 cycles per minute, maintaining saturation of 98% in room air, with bilaterally symmetrical chest movements and adequate chest rise. There was no added sounds heard. Circulation wise, patient had a heart rate of 92 beats per minute, maintaining blood pressure of 100 over 60 millimeter per mercury, with all peripheral pulses being palpable. Disability wise, patient had full score of GCS E4 V5 M6 with pupils bilaterally reactive and symmetrical. Exposure wise, patient had a temperature of 98.6 degree Fahrenheit with blood sugars of 116 milligram per deciliter. Now with this primary survey, we moved on to adjuncts. When we took a venous blood gas, it read compensated metabolic acidosis with pH of 7.33, PCO2 of 33.6 and bicarbonate of 16.4. Hemoglobin was 5.8 with lactate of 3.4. Creatinine was 1.4 with bilirubin being 8.3. Potassium 4.2 and sodium levels 124 was noted. At this point, we also asked for a point of care PT INR, and PT was 16.4 and INR 1.46. Then total counts was 11,100 point of care.
Okay, in the case of upper GI bleed, why you want to do total count? What is the indication for total count at this stage after completing primary survey?
So if at all the patient has, since he's a CLD patient, any infection has to be ruled out also. That's why a point of care CVCRP, in order to rule out any other complications like SPP and other
adjuncts to the primary survey means that immediately that is helping for your diagnosis. So somebody is coming with upper GI bleed. If you are asking for a hemoglobin, accepted. We can. I am not denying that you need to look for the counts, but right now it is not the priority.
Platelets.
Why you want to look the platelets now?
For CLD patients, platelets
already
can
have
be
checked
low, and upper GI bleed.
Okay, so upper GI bleed. So when will you transfuse platelets?
50,000 below.
Will transfuse platelet for an upper GI bleed.
FFP coagulopathy.
That you have done your PTI now. See, you have to have a justification for doing some test. Total count, you have to be specific. You can look for hemoglobin and platelet count. That is acceptable. So whole blood count, WBC at this point of time. Again, what will happen in CLD patients? What will happen to the WBC counts? What will happen in CLD patient? For example, if he is a CLD, we don't know. We haven't got any history. Only thing is bilirubin is some high, and he has got an upper GI bleed. That is the only history that you have told. No other history you have been given. So, what will happen to the counts? Usually, what will
low.
It will be on the lower side. That is the usual thing. So, you have to justify whatever your investigations you are sending. You have to justify at this point of time. Rather than at this point, I wanted you to put in 2 large bore IV access. That is more important rather than doing a WBC count at this point. You have to definitely go ahead with the 2 large bore IV access. So, why you want to do large bore IV access? You tell he is not in hypotension. 100 by 60. You said 100 by 60. 100 by 60 is BP.
There's a chances that he might have another episode of hematemesis. So
anytime he can deteriorate. Anytime he can deteriorate. Right now he was compensated. He is in a compensated shock because tachycardia of 92.
90.
What will be the usual heart rate in CLD victims?
Patient will have lower BP with higher heart rate. Low BP.
CLD patients will usually have bradycardia. Will be on lower side, 60s and 70s.
Why bradycardia? They will be either on a beta blocker, either carvedilol, that is a recommendation, or maybe older patients they will be on propranolol. So these 2 agents is the usual thing. And another thing is that if there is already jaundice can it cause bradycardia? Can it cause bradycardia?
Yes.
If it's like a high more than 15 and all, that itself can cause SA node dysfunction, and as a result it can have bradycardia. So usually what we will see is a bradycardia, but what you have to think is that the 92 heart rate, even if it is normal, I think this patient is going for hypertension. Even if it is like 92, sometimes he might be on a beta blocker, we are not sure. We haven't got the drug history.
Right.
But 92 is not a very good sign in a CLD patient if it is a CLD. Also for a coronary artery disease patient, they will be on beta blockers. Those who are on aspirin and coming with ELD. So 92 in the sense you have to be cautious.
Then Foley's catheter was, we catheterized the patient to monitor the urine output, and then ultrasound was asked for, bedside ultrasound was done in order to look for IVC fluid
Priorities.
status.
Priority. That is my bedside ultrasound you have to do for IVC collapsibility 100/60. Have you started him on an AAV fluids?
Yes, sir. We started.
5.6 hemoglobin. Have you ordered for blood?
Yes, sir.
That all things is the priority. You have to tell. When you see a hemoglobin of 5.6, you have to ask for blood. You have to start transfusion of blood. Whatever be the reason, 5.6 is lower side. That the patient has got a compensated shock right now, he can become decompensated at any point of time. So 5.6, you ask for blood, then INR is 1.46. So probably we can manage with other agents like vitamin K at this point of time. Maybe FFP if you are having a massive transfusion plan. MTP, we are activating MTP. Otherwise, you can just give the whatever is required.
So then at this point in time, 2 large IV cannulas were secured. IV crystalloids was started with 20 ml per kg rate. So 1 point bolus was given. Actually 2 point bolus was given. After that, maintenance fluid. IVC was checked up in between the fluid.
What was the initial
bolus.
IVC?
Initial IVC was 1.4 centimeters, so with more than 50% collapsibility.
Okay.
And after that, bolus was given. IV fluid.
Again,
was given.
Okay. Why you have given a 2 point of bolus in this patient? What is the indication for starting fluid bolus for them?
One, he would have, it could be a volume depleted state because he's lost blood through hematemesis and melena.
Yes, in such
Plus,
case,
in-
what will be the best best thing to replace his intravascular volume?
PRPC,
Pack
blood,
cells.
yeah.
Yes.
So, in the meantime, by the time...
What will be the target map for a patient with upper GA bleed?
60.
65. What is our patient's map? It is 70. 100 on 60, map will be 70. So, still we want to give fluids in such condition. It is not correct.
You need not start a bolus fluid is not warranted at this point. Why 100/60 is very clear now. 100/60 has come with hematemesis. Some clots would have formed and that will be stopping the bleeding. And you are again increasing the blood pressure, that clot will dislodge again, and again the patient can go in for hypotension. So if the BP was 80/40 at this point, I would have accepted, okay, you give IV fluid until the blood comes. The ideal thing, you arrange for blood, you continuously monitor the patient, get an IV access and start on blood transfusion. That will be the best thing for this patient. And if you find anything else to stop the bleeding, you add that adjuncts. Like if it is an ulcer bleed, if it is an varicose bleed, like that you have to add on drugs. Right now, I don't think you need to give a fluid bolus for this patient. 100/60 BP is acceptable. If it is dropping further, then no need to give. Again, a 2 point bolus is not mandatory. You can just give 250 ml. 250 ml, you can see how he is responding, and whatever target you are achieving, that is 90/60 is acceptable for this patient. Okay.
So then, after that, PPI inhibitors, bolus was given PAN for 80 mg, and then infusion was started, so at the rate of 8 mg per hour, and then along with the somatostatin
Okay.
analog of
Let us go stepwise. Actually, we have completed primary survey, and as adjunct, you have cannulated IV cannula, and you have asked for Paxil arrangement. After that, you give sample history so that we will know about what is the patient having. Then we will go for these things.
So basically, patient, when we are talking about the signs and symptoms of the patient, he presented with 3 to 4 episodes of hematemesis, 2 to 3 episodes of melena, with normal urine output. There was no altered sensorium. Positive finding was, one, he had reversal of sleep since a couple of weeks. There was no history of any abdominal pain, fever, or respiratory distress noted.
He had any previous episode of hematemesis?
No previous. First time
First time he is having
yeah.
hematemesis. So signs and symptoms. Fine.
When is the last episode of hematemesis?
The day he arrived, morning.
Approximate time.
Around 2 to 3 hours prior to the arrival of
To the ER.
to the ER.
After that, had he consumed anything?
No sir, NPO after that.
Coffee
Because
ground vomitus
Coffee,
or frank blood?
no sir, coffee colored water.
Coffee colored
He was
vomitus.
pretty apprehensive because according to him, whatever he eats, he'll vomit blood. So he refrained from any consuming anything.
Okay.
No drug allergy history was that was
He is
known
not
to
on any
us.
medications.
He is on medication, sir.
What are medications?
He is actually a known case of CLD with portal hypertension of child D and male 16.
Mm.
CAD with status post CABG done about 3 years ago.
Mm.
Diabetes, hypertension, and dyslipidemia. He is on Cardivas, that is Cardival, Clopilid, Rifaximin, Syrup loose, and multivitamin tablets.
Okay. Okay. So with the beta blocker, his heart rate is 92. So again, that is caution.
Something alarming.
So last meal was the previous day's lunch, because since night he's been having hematemesis and
What is the etiology of CLD?
most alcohol related. So
Alcohol. If he was an ethanol consumer.
Ethanol related.
So events, like I mentioned, he had developed 3 to 4 episodes of hematemesis previous night, with 2 to 3 episodes of melena. Last episode being 2 to 3 hours prior to the arrival to ER. On reassessment, airway, breathing, circulation was now maintained. So now moving on to the examination part, patient was conscious and oriented, had pallor, but pallor could not be commented much on because patient was icteric. So clubbing was present, bilateral pedal edema was there, no flaps noted. Head to foot examination, patient had patchy loss of hair and gynecomastia seen. Now systemic examination wise, per abdomen, patient abdomen was soft but distended, but shifting dullness and fluid thrill were absent. Bowel sounds were present. CVS and the other rest of the systems were pretty much within normal limits.
Hydrocele. Any hydrocele?
No hydrolysis, no hydrocele noted, no
Supraclavicular lymphadenopathy? No.
no parotid enlargement, nothing of that
Nothing
sort
was
was
there.
there.
Okay.
So now with this, we had sent in for the lab investigations. Routine lab investigations came by. Hemoglobin was 5.8 lab value, platelets was 51,000, urea 59.8, and creatinine 1.3. PTINR 16.1 and 1.34. Magnesium was 2, calcium 7.3, and CRP was 4.2.
What is the urea?
59.8.
Creatinine?
Creatinine 1.3.
How will you say this high urea?
We do that one.
No, why he is having a high urea in this patient? What would be the reason? Where he can get a high urea and normal creatine. Creatine normal, no? But urea is on the higher side. What is this patient having? Upper GA
GAPH.
plate. So that is one of the reasons you can get a high urea ratio.
Then SGOT, SGPT was 22 and 13.1. Then albumin level was 2.9. We calculated the Glasgow Blatchford score that accounted to 14 points, which meant it's a high risk patient, and medical intervention either in the form of blood transfusion or endoscopy was needed.
So before you go into endoscopy, for example in the ER, what all management strategies you will do?
So we will start the patient with the PPI inhibitor. So that was
First,
What is the
fluids.
What is the first thing that you have to keep in this
First
patient?
thing.
First thing.
First order.
It would be blood transfusion arrangement, fluids,
You are planning for OGD-scopy. What should?
NPO.
Yes, that should be your first order. Then
Patient should be kept NPO, and within 12 hours of hospital admission, patient has to be taken for an endoscopy.
Early
procedure.
endoscopies were
Wow.
depending upon the facility. 12 hours ideal, but much more than that possible well and good. Then
When we talk about the pharmacological therapy, so patient was started on PPI inhibitors.
see why you started a PP inhibitors.
Because it will prevent rebleeding.
So PP inhibitors, how you have started?
Pan bolus was given at 80 mg, followed by an IV infusion of 8 mg per hour rate. Then after that,
You need an
Infusion. Actually, do you need infusion? Pantoprazole infusion is needed.
endoscopy you'll have to do for rebleeding. to
Really?
prevent it.
Infusion is needed for such a patient, or 80 mg as a BD dose. Is it equally
40
good?
mg BD itself is okay. See, here there is a problem. The patient is having a coffee ground vomitus, but already there is a background issue of chronic liver disease, and also he is on dual antiplatelets. So somebody is coming directly with a chronic liver disease. There is no history of CAD or any antiplatelets. You can give PPI. If you are not suspecting an ulcer bleed, no need to give infusion. Only 40 mg BD is enough. Just the stress ulcer prophylaxis dose is enough. No need for infusion. Infusion is usually when we will give is when we are suspecting an ulcer bleed. So you can have ulcer bleed and varicose bleed. So varicose bleed routinely we doesn't need an infusion. A 40 mg BD or 80 mg maximum BD, that is more than enough. But when you are having an ulcer bleed, then you give a bolus and you continue on an infusion. And again in ulcer bleed there is no role for somatostatin analogs. So otherwise you can start on somatostatin analogs like octreotide.
Octreotide.
Okay.
Octreotide was started.
So
just
for
one
this
second.
patient we are not very sure because never he had any previous history of hematemesis. He is on aspirin, clopidogrel as such, and he is giving history of coffee ground vomitus and melena, and also he is on a chronic liver disease. Whether it's a varicose bleed or an ulcer bleed, we are in a bridge. We are not very sure about it. So there is no harm in starting both the things.
So octreotide was started with the dose of 100 microgram was given bolus, followed by 50 microgram per hour IV infusion was started. And now a prokinetic of metoclopramide was also given to this patient, and a dose of antibiotic was also started with sulfasalazine, cefoperazole.
Why you want to start ceftriaxone sulbactam?
For secondary infections, SPPs,
Why you want
CAD,
specifically ceftriaxone sulbactam?
because it has good GI
You have
absorption.
ceftriaxone is there, you have quinolones is there, you have this thing, penicillin, whatever be the any gram negative, so not penicillin, any generation 1 or second generation cephalosporin you can start. Why you wanted to start specifically on ceftriaxone sulbactam? Or when will you start? I will ask, when will you start ceftriaxone sulbactam also? So you started a ceftriaxone sulbactam or ceftriaxone. So when will you start ceftriaxone sulbactam?
When we want to cover the pseudomonas, so that
No.
coverage or hospital, previous
See,
hospital.
as per
admissions.
the guidelines, whatever is available, you have to start the patient on an antibiotics. That is for sure. So depends upon two things. Two things is, one, you are suspecting a very bad SBP along with it, or already the patient is in sepsis or child C status. Then you are, and again your antimicrobial policy of that area. You can decide upon which antibiotic you need to start. So a sick patient who is more prone for infections, who having a very bad child score, definitely you can go directly and start with piperacillin sulbactam, upper GI bleed with this thing. But and like this patient, he's a child A, he don't have any other risk factors, you can easily start any quinolones or ceftriaxone is okay. But why we are starting ceftriaxone sulbactam? Because ceftriaxone sulbactam is the antibiotic of the institutional policy. Because whatever we have seen, the group of patients that is coming to our emergency room and our gastro department, they are more susceptible with, the organism is more susceptible with ceftriaxone sulbactam. That's why we are starting on a local antibiotic policy, we are starting ceftriaxone sulbactam. Otherwise, ceftriaxone or ciprofloxacin, levofloxacin is enough. Any of this quinolone is, any gram-negative agent is enough. But specifically ceftriaxone sulbactam, that is the reason why we are starting. You should know the reason behind it. And if the patient is more sick, you can go ahead with ceftriaxone sulbactam or go ahead with carbapenems. So that all depends upon the severity of the infection. Anything else to add on?
Yes. So, as a message, we have to start on even ceftriaxone is also fine, or ciprofloxacin is also fine. No need to go for directly to Magnex.
So antibiotics, PPI, somatostatin, fluids, and by blood was transfused.
Okay. So target.
Okay. How frequently you have to transfuse blood, and what will be the target in such a condition in your patient,
So
and what is the recommendations?
if at all the patient has comorbidities,
He has.
It's a
yes, he has comorbidities. So the idea is to keep transfuse the blood when the hemoglobin level is around 8 to 9.
okay. If a patient is having coronary arteries, cardiac comorbidities, then target hemoglobin is more than 9. If not, patient is
7.
otherwise normal, then 7 to 8 is okay.
So in this patient, since the hemoglobin was 5 plus comorbidities, this was an indication to start him on PRBC transfusion. So we started it.
Suppose the same patient, how many PRBCs you need to transfuse? 5.8 you said. So how fast you want to bring it back to maybe 9, and what will happen after transfusing each PRBCs?
So each PRBC will be given over a period of 3 to 4 hours.
Okay.
And after one pint will raise the hemoglobin level by 0.7 to 1 gram per deciliter. Now the targeted hemoglobin should be between 7 to 9 milligram per deciliter.
Its target is very clear. It should be above 9.
Above 9.
So we calculate the deficit.
So when you calculate the deficit, it's coming around 4 pints. So we'll just give 4 pints over 1 day.
That will again cause complications.
What complication?
Massive.
More than trial, fluid overload state for him. He is already undergoing a CABG patient. So you want to judiciously give blood transfusion, and we have to recheck after infusion. Sometimes what will happen is that there will be some amount of dilution also. Maybe the initial hemoglobin might be wrong. So maybe after one transfusion, what you usually see 1 or 2 blood transfusion itself, if you are stopping the bleeding, it will come back to 9. So that's a usual thing that we see. So you have to be, after every transfusion or after every second transfusion, you have to recheck the hemoglobin. And also, if you have any doubt of fluid, you have to use judiciously furosemide, because again, he is having an altered sleep rhythm pattern already. But when you give Lasix, again, there is a high chance of him developing what? Hypokalemia and hepatic encephalopathy. So otherwise, you can give Lacilactone, potassium sparing diuretic. So that will take care of his potassium. And blood transfusion was started, and his hemoglobin target was achieved.
Between the pints, 20 milligram of Lasix.
Suppose the same patient is having an hypotension, and you want to start octreotide. You have any other options?
Vasopressin can be used.
Vasopressin, okay. So noradrenaline, definitely yes. Noradrenaline, definitely yes. I am not saying. But any other agent specifically for CLD, hepatorenal syndrome group of patients? Terlipressin. You have to remember terlipressin. So terlipressin again doesn't need to be given as an infusion. You can give it as a bolus dose. So that is the additional advantage. But it is costly. But when you compare to octreotide, the cost factor is almost the same. Octreotide you will give 100 microgram stat followed by 50 microgram per hour as an infusion. But when you give terlipressin, almost the cost factor is the same. So that is another option that you need to keep in mind. Terlipressin, it has got very potent vasopressor effect, as well as it can be used for in GI bleed also. So that is again regarding terlipressin.
Is there any indication for placing Ryle's tube in this patient?
So when a CLD patient comes in, we'll have to first check a PT-INR and see if the patient is in coagulopathy or not. Because if the patient is in coagulopathy, any trivial trauma while inserting RT can cause again bleeding. So
the question here is very clear. Upper GI bleed, whether you need to put a Ryle's tube or not. Previously, any hospital you go, Ryle's tube is also a mandatory thing. They will put a Ryle's tube and send them here. Because whether you want to put a Ryle's tube or not, that is the question. You said coagulopathy, you will be cautious in putting a Ryle's tube. Where else you will be cautious in putting a Ryle's tube? So previously, that, as I told you, it was a concept that Ryle's tube has to be there, because blood itself is an irritant, so it can cause again further vomiting. So like that it was told. But what will happen is that when it's a Ryle's tube, again it's a painful procedure, especially if the patient had a recent endoscopy. Okay, recent endoscopy and they have done some banding or clipping. At those group of patients, definitely you should not be attempting to put a Ryle's tube. Because when you insert this Ryle's tube, the banding and clips can dislodge and the patient can further bleed. So usually in our practice, we are not putting Ryle's tube. That is a routine thing. We are not entertaining to put Ryle's tube. Maybe for a diagnostic purpose, whether we are not very sure it's a hematemesis or a hemoptysis, or whether there is blood in the stomach. Very, very rare situation, or whether there is any other indication, only a Ryle's tube is warranted. Otherwise, routine hematemesis management, Ryle's tube is not needed. Anyway, they have to take for early endoscopy. So only before and all endoscopic centers was very less. So you need to refer to a far center. So at that time they think that while transportation the patient can aspirate. So they used to clear the secretions, clear the blood and used to send. But now everywhere there is an endoscopy, they can take directly for endoscopy and clear off the blood.
Okay. If at all this patient goes for if at all you are planning to intubate this patient, what are the precautions that you will take?
One, because this patient is a ascites patient, it will be like a full abdomen, so the chances of aspiration will be chances of aspiration is increased. So in that case, we'll give a glycopyrrolate or way to
further any
pre-medication.
modifications in your procedure.
Extra thing which you want to have?
Propped up, you don't put the patient completely supine, so you prop the patient up to at least 20
Then?
to 30 degree and then go with intubation, that one thing. And since the patient is in coagulopathy,
Any other maneuvers? Celix maneuver can be tried. Okay, fine. To prevent aspiration. Okay, then what will be the other precaution that you need to take? That is the Vivek has asked the question.
Yonkers you have to keep ready. Then anything else?
Place the patient supine only after giving
Paralytic.
rather than keeping supine.
Okay.
propped up.
Again, back mask ventilation. You have to be cautious. So back mask ventilation, you oxygenate them well, but ventilation again the air can go into the stomach and get inflated and further worsening can happen. So Celix maneuver is one thing you can try for patient with upper GI bleed, but remember that the drug of choice always remember rocuronium will be the best agent. Rocuronium will be the best paralytic agent, and succinylcholine preferably to be avoided in this category. Why? Why I told to avoid succinylcholine?
Because it can precipitate vomiting.
And
It
also
can increase the
potassium levels.
no. It can increases the intragastric pressure. That is one. Next thing, lower esophageal sphincter tone also will be gone. So suddenly you are doing back mask and you are not able to intubate, and suddenly you are removing the back mask. Suddenly the patient will aspirate and you will go for hypoxia further. So rocuronium will not have these effects. So that is whenever you look for any of these guidelines, preferred agent for emergency room intubation is always rocuronium. Now whichever you go for ATLS, ACLS, PALS, wherever the preferred agent they are recommending it is rocuronium, and only in very specific condition succinylcholine is an ideal agent of choice, like in myasthenia where you have a neuromuscular dysfunction disorders. They are preferring succinylcholine. Rest all the area we will prefer going ahead with rocuronium. This patient, where you wanted to admit? You wanted to admit in the ICU or in the ward? Where you wanted to prefer to admit?
ICU, sir.
Why?
One, because again.
On what criteria you will say, okay, this patient should go into the ICU? So which all category should go into the ICU?
So this another scoring called as a Brockall scoring that also speaks about the increased mortality in hospital mortality. This patient falls into the high risk category itself because one, he has comorbidities, second is in coagulopathy, plus his hemoglobin is pretty low of 5.8 million.
Coagulopathy 1.4.
1.4 it is.
1.36 normal.
Plus hemoglobin is pretty low, so 5.8, and the chances of him having another.
We can do the transfusion in the ward. So my answer will be here. If he is able to get an early endoscopy and you are finding the reason why he is having the bleeding, after that you have solved the issue, he can go to any place. He can go to a ward also. So still you are inconclusive and still his hemoglobin is low, and still if he is having hemodynamic compromise and his child status or whatever be the clear scoring is high, you should go to the ICU. So definitely we can't patient to patient we need to decide, and depending upon his status. AIM 65, what is it? AIM 65 scoring?
Sir, AIM 65 comprises of albumin, albumin less than 3, then INR 1.5,
Above 1.5.
above 1.5 with altered mental status and systolic blood pressure of less than 90, and age 65 years and above. AIM-65 is a score which gives an insight on the patient's mortality and hospital mortality.
What
so
is-
if you have again,
What is our patient's AIM-65 score and
So
what is
albumin was 2.9.
what is his score?
Total
Each
score-
carries 1 point.
Ah.
So what is his score out of 5 and what is his predicted mortality?
So in this patient it was only 1, only because albumin was low. Otherwise the rest of the parameters were pretty much above. So his in-her hospital mortality would only be 1%. It's low.
so again, that is one thing that you can use easily in the emergency room. Score about 2, put him in ICU. Score less than 2, put him in the ward. As per the criteria, he can go to the ward. But that is the criteria as such. But if you have you have a 10 patients where you have to decide who should go to the ICU, then at that point you can decide by this. But if you have an ICU bed available, preferably this patient can go to the ICU one day and stay, and because of one or two things, because of low hemoglobin and multiple comorbidities, especially coronary artery disease, and we have delay in endoscopy because usually GI people need an hemoglobin of 7 to 8. So we need to increase this and you need to send for endoscopy. So till that time he can be in the ICU, and once stable, endoscopy, after endoscopy he can be out of what. How long you want to continue octreotide?
Up until endoscopy, but up until there's another intervention that can
No,
be
how long you will
stopped.
continue? My question is how long?
24 hours.
Once you have find out the culprit vessel and you have treated that, you can
Stop
stop.
it.
But why we are continuing? Because already we would have loaded and kept it ready. So we just wanted to don't discard this medicine. We are just continuing. Usually after the endoscopy you can stop. Unless and until the endoscopy they are not very confident that they have found out the culprit vessel. They have not done the banding. There was some leaking, oozing again. Then you can justify it and continue. Then we will